the Sustainability Management Master's Program, you're answering one simple question. Do you care about your future generation? If you care about your kids, their grandkids, then you care about sustainability. And a sustainability manager is someone who has the tools to make people understand how they can contribute towards developing a sustainable world. We have both part-time and full-time students. Our curriculum is 30 hours. Instead of thesis, we have a research project course and a seminar course which provides them with the kind of research background they will need to be successful in their job. But at the same time, sustainability is not always everything about environment. It also relates to the business. They will take a sustainable business strategies course. They will take a project management course. Most of these courses are going to be taught by industry people, the people who are doing sustainability on a daily basis as a part of their job. Any organization that has a large number of employees and has a physical infrastructure, they will have to have a sustainability office. If you have the passion to develop and maintain a sustainable world, come to us and we will help you shape your passion into a career which will create an impact.
Well, thank you for that very, very warm introduction. I appreciate it, and I have to give a big thanks to not just Stevens Institute, but also to Hugo New, my good friend Wendy, and of course to Dominique and team over there for making sure that I had an opportunity to engage with everyone here. With me today is Candace Perry.
I think having some feedback problem. People who are not the commissioner, please mute yourself. Thank you.
No problem at all. I'm here with Candace Perry, who is the Director of Environmental Justice here at DEP and leads efforts not just within our organization, but within the state executive branch as a whole, which is a very tall order. So we're always lucky to have Candace. And one of the things that we'll hit upon is how the work of ensuring greater equity and what we say here at DEP and in the Murphy administration, working to further the promise of environmental justice. The way that we go about that, well, there's many ways that we go about that, but one of the key pillars of an environmental justice strategy is how you engage with communities, underserved and overburdened communities in particular, that we serve or seek to serve through our work. So I think it's a good baseline for folks to who are tuning in here to understand what that work even is to begin with. Like what is it that we do, and why do we need to focus our energies on achieving greater equity in that work? Why isn't there already equity as an outcome of that work? Why does one need a director of environmental justice? Why do you need an environmental justice law or all of the strictures that we've set up in place here at DEP and other places in the administration to help further that imperative? So I think where a good place to start with is to just briefly talk about what it is that we even do at the Department of Environmental Protection, because it's very easily misunderstood, and I'm sure that folks here are that are tuning in with us today are somewhat acquainted with what it is that we do. But the Department of Environmental Protection is an executive branch agency in the state government that has a number of different responsibilities in serving the public that are all executed under this one umbrella. So we work on environmental quality, right? Ensuring that the pollution that is generated by the businesses that run in the transportation infrastructure and all of the manufacturing and facilities that serve us and uplift our economy throughout the state are meeting pollution laws that are set by the federal and state government, because there's pollution attendant to everything we do. We're creating pollution right now, right? The question is always is not whether it exists or not, but are we allowing too much of it? What is the right level, and how do we best protect the public health, safety, and the environment? And so in protecting the air, land, and water, we administer the execution of legislation created by the state or federal government to limit air pollution, to limit water pollution, and to permit the facilities and institutions that might have pollution outcomes from whatever their processes are, be it the operation of a recycling plant or the manufacturing of a wind turbine or the running of a boiler that keeps the hospital warm. All of those things have pollution outcomes. We make sure that they're not too much. We administer our state parks. We protect our fish and wildlife through conservation programs. We build resilience to storms and climate change through our resilience infrastructure programs and through our administration of programs that reduce flood risk through permitting and development type standard setting. And we also work to invest heavily in environmental infrastructure, whether that is in parks that serve our communities or whether that is in the water pipes that bring us our drinking water. There is a lot to what we do here. But across all of it, there's a theme. And that theme is, may not be surprising, or perhaps shouldn't be, that while the United States and New Jersey as a state over the last, I would say, 50 years of modern environmental law and management, while we've done really great things to reduce the amount of pollution in waterways, the Clean Water Act, for example, which celebrated its 50th anniversary this year, it was passed at a time when rivers were literally on fire, right? And they're not anymore. The quality is better. The quality of our beaches, there were beaches where my parents wouldn't let me even go as a young person. And our beach quality is outstanding now, right? But, and air, the same is true of air quality. Our air quality is better than it once was at the time that the Clean Air Act was established. But the execution of those laws, the implementation of all these good things, the positives have not been experienced equitably by all communities. And that means that that has resulted in there being a proliferation of more highly polluting facilities and operations in Black and brown and low income and indigenous communities for a lot of different reasons, for reasons that are systemic, because the way that the laws function and the way that we've deployed them, right? Folks at the DEP work their hearts out every day to protect people in our environment. But as a function of the way that those very laws work, the way that the system was set up, there is more effectively burdensome outcomes in communities that are underserved, or communities of color, or communities of low income. So one of the things we're grappling with, and we just left a call with the highest levels of the Federal Environmental Protection Agency on this very score, is how you right the ship. How do we deploy new policy, new statutory and regulatory authority, if we're lucky enough to have it, in order to correct for that injustice? And it's an incredibly challenging thing to do. And there's one place that it starts, and that if we commit ourselves to, we can really have meaningful impact. And that is by engaging with and listening to the needs of communities, of people in communities that have not seen the same degree of environmental benefit or pollution protection. So Candace, I thought maybe you could talk a bit about how it is that we do that, right? Because it's sort of what we call putting it sort of a community first policy, right? If we want to have a better impact on the communities we serve, well, we sure as well better understand what their lived experience is. Candace?
Go
Yeah,
ahead, Candace.
and I would say that maybe a function of why Sean talked about the systems that we have are the way that they are today is because we haven't historically done that, or at least to the extent that we should have or have needed to, is to really reach out to communities that are most affected and hear about their lived experiences, and then using that feedback to color the work that we do. And so that is our charge. That's our mission that we've been embarking on, I'd say, for the last few years, is to identify communities that don't have strong relationships or strong ties to the department, and really just ask them about their experiences, their day-to-day lives, and the injustices that they see, and the injustices for which they may not have the language for, but it's our duty as public servants, as government representatives, to be able to be that liaison and that translator. So when I speak to communities all the time, they'll tell me exactly what the issues are, where they're happening, and what the effects of those issues are on themselves, on their families, on their residents, or on their neighbors, on their communities. But they may not always be able to communicate that in a way that is understandable to a policymaker or to a decision maker, whether that be at the federal, the state, or the local level. And so it is incumbent upon us to really do that listening. And then because we do this every day in our 9 to 5 in terms of making policies, reviewing permits, issuing decisions, we can figure out the best places to incorporate their feedback, or so their experiences about what they're saying, into actionable changes that can make a difference to their day-to-day lived experiences. So whether that be a change in our standard operating procedures, so our processes within the departments, how we make decisions, who makes those decisions, and what time frame do we make the decisions, for example, or how we allocate the financial resources that we get from the federal government. Who's getting those resources, and who's currently not getting those resources, and who should be getting those resources, and how do we prioritize pots of money specifically for those who need it the most, are just some examples that are popping to the top of my head. But it's incumbent upon us to take that information and then go and do something with it. So to that end, one of the key vehicles or mechanisms by which we're really seeking and reaching out into communities is simply by visiting them. The commissioner and I have been all across the state this year to different counties, inviting communities to meet us at churches and community centers and libraries to really hear from them about what their day-to-day is like. And then again, we are taking notes, we're asking follow-up questions, and then we're taking that information back to our senior management and even down to various levels within our staff to really understand, well, what are those processes that have created this experience or this, this issue, and what can we do about it? And so it's been really enlightening to, one, establish that relationship with, like I said, new communities for which we just haven't been in touch with, unfortunately, so that, one, they can know that the department exists, they know what we do, kind of that overview that Commissioner LaTourette just explained, and so that they know if another injustice or another something comes up, they have a contact. They can reach out to X, Y, and Z office, and in particular, the Office of Environmental Justice, for follow-up, for brainstorming, for solution building. And so that's a first step, just kind of building that relationship. And then also establishing a level of trust. So we were talking about kind of the systemic issues or the patterns of decision-making that has gotten us into the place where we are. Who could blame some communities for not wanting to come to the table, or for not wanting to engage and to do outreach with us because of some of those historic decisions And frankly, they're being overlooked and not being invited to the table. So we want to extend that invitation, listen to them, and then be responsive to actually go and follow up and to identify the opportunities to change things about our processes and our procedures and our decisions so that we're not perpetuating or replicating those experiences that they're seeing. And so with all of that, it takes a lot of time. We don't do it overnight. The commissioner and I can't be everywhere at once, but slowly but surely, we are reaching into communities and establishing those relationships and creating an action plan that in the future, the department can act upon and hopefully will serve as a template or an example for other agencies, even in other states, to do the same.
Thank you, Candace, for sharing that. And it's in a way, as I listen, though I've heard Candace explain this many times, but every time that I reflect on it, it seems so simple, right? At its foundation, what environmental justice is about listening and being a good neighbor, right? And sometimes the things that seem the simplest can often be the hardest to do, right? What is this seminar series about, right? You're all engaged in the work of sustainability, right? You're engaged in this. You're engaged in how we can ensure that the work that we're doing, whether it is in our public sector, our private sector, whether we're in healthcare or we are in manufacturing, if we're in renewable energy or waste management, if we are in water supply, or are we in civil engineering and construction, everything that we do across every sector of our economy and civil society, every single thing we do has an externality, always. And the work that you are all studying and that the lecturers have shared with you over the course of this series, as I understand it, is how sustainability imperatives can come into practice across these various sectors. And to my mind, how we work to further that promise of environmental justice is yet another piece of the sustainability story, right? Because the reason that there is environmental inequities is because there are externalities that we have not properly accounted for. And that by accounting for those externalities, we can help over time to, I won't be fanciful and say eliminate them, but reduce them, make more positive impacts in their place wherever we possibly can. And so regardless of the particular sector of work that you may be studying for or engaged in, there is necessarily an equity component. There's necessarily an environmental justice component, because the externalities of the pollution that we all together create are overwhelmingly felt more by those who have less and those who are less resourced in order to combat those externalities.
Right.
And just by sitting down and listening and having this very conversation, we can become more attentive to the existence of that externality. And because overwhelmingly people are people of good nature, when we realize that we are having an unintended consequence that is harmful to the neighbors with whom we share this state, we're going to want to do a little better to try to avoid that externality. And that, I think, comes through in so many of the conversations that we have, where folks don't realize the adverse consequence of, say, a development in one place without proper flood controls that causes damaging effects for a neighbor downriver, right? But when we begin to soberly assess those issues and build an action plan and prioritize the resolution of externalities that haven't been appropriately resolved, then we all do better, right? There's a misunderstanding consistently when we talk about environmental justice that we are talking about an urban problem, that we're talking about a Black or brown problem, and that resolving that problem means that instead of citing less desirable elements of our overall supply chain in communities of color or in urban areas, that we're instead going to locate them in wealthier and whiter areas. A very common misimpression of what we mean by environmental justice, and nothing could be further than the truth. And we encountered this sort of false binary that, and look, this is America. We love our false binary choices, right? But what I love about groups like this one and the field that you are all studying and or engaged in is that sustainability itself eschews a false binary, right? Because the false binary says that you can have one of these two things, but never the other. You can have a healthy environment or a healthy economy. You could have clean water consistently available, or you can have bills that are too high and unaffordable. That you can't do these two things at the same time. Now that, of course, is bananas, technical term, by the way. But we are societally really primed to think in those terms. And I think one of the things that we experience in the dialogue that we have on the community level, in the policy that we are developing, in the new regulatory strategies that we're trying to put forward, is that we have to get ourselves out of this mindset of either or, and look at our economic and environmental imperatives as an end both, right? Because we don't have to send the highly polluting facility that wants to be in Newark over to Basking Ridge. We can just have less highly polluting facilities by improving upon technology, by working to avoid and minimize wherever practicable those externalities that we weren't controlling before. And as the work of sustainability and environmental protection have showed us over the years, we can usually do that at a lower cost and in a way that creates more opportunity. Because for as long as we've been sold this sort of false binary, you can have environmental improvement or you can have economic development, and you can't have both. What we've realized over the last 50 years is that the modern environmental regulatory schema has created 6 times more wealth than it has ever cost. And that is a function of ingenuity and just the reality of if we identify waste streams that can be put to better end uses, for example, we can create whole economies in their place and scale them. But you have to start by wanting to, right? And Candace, if you have any reflections on any of that from our conversations or the work that we've done to explain what this imperative even means.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and some of the things that I try to say in my talks, even when talking to my colleagues here within the department, is to help them see environmental justice as not an add-on or some newly thought of thing that they have to do that makes their job harder. But there's a lot of processes that we have in place that we already do. You know, we already permit siting. We just need to think a little bit deeper, a little bit more creatively about those externalities and how they apply to certain groups, and make sure that those externalities are either eliminated or avoided or minimized. So there are some additional steps, yes, but it doesn't mean that the entirety of our thinking or the entirety of how we've set up our careers or our processes need to be thrown away. It just needs to be tweaked. We just need some creativity. We just need to brainstorm. We just need to do things in a new way. But we don't need to start over. And so in some of the conversations I have about just kind of brainstorming new ways to process or to add a lens of environmental justice on top of the things we already do, we start with, well, what do we do? And so it's kind of a conversation to think about. When you think about systems, and systemic injustice can be very nebulous to think about. But the way that I like to break it down is that, systems are made up of agencies. If we take the government as an example, systems are made up of agencies, and agencies are made up of departments, and departments are made up of offices, and offices are made up of managers, and managers have staff members, right? And so it's not to say that systemic injustices are the responsibility of any one person or have been created by any one person, but because people make offices, and offices make departments, and departments make agencies, and agencies make systems, we do have a collective role to play. And it really is incumbent upon us to really think about everything that we do from start to finish, and really look for those opportunities to think in a more creative way, or to tweak or to add some fixes that will ultimately avoid or minimize those externalities. And so it doesn't mean we throw out the whole system, and it doesn't mean that we blame any one person or entity within the system, but it is our collective responsibility to acknowledge that we make up the system. And so our individual scope of influence really does have a role to play in the collective experiences of our people. And so it starts with us, and it starts with us as individuals, you all as students, and you just want to think about your sphere of influence. What do you have control over? And what processes and decision-making opportunities can you think differently about? Or can you go and sit with communities that may be most affected by an issue or not, to really ask them, what are the opportunities in which you can think differently about your sphere of influence? And all of that collectively adds together to create an opportunity for change.
It is very much the case that you can be the change you want to see. To borrow a too often borrowed proverb, but to make that concrete, right? What do we mean by changing a system? I'll try to give like one concrete example, and then Candace, please, by all means, chime in. So let's take the issue of air pollution, for example. New Jersey has long had significant air pollution issues. Despite all of our good work under the Clean Air Act, we're still in non-attainment for certain parameters. If you don't know what that means, that's okay. Neither do I. No, I'm joking. So let's look at that issue of air pollution, and how do we improve upon air pollution outcomes for communities that have higher degrees of pollution in particular. So if we ask ourselves a few different questions than we're used to asking as an agency that reviews the amount of pollution and the permits that are given to companies or individuals to emit that pollution, we ask ourselves different questions during that process, we could potentially have different outcomes, right? Because the questions we ask today were built to have certain outcomes that are more protective of air quality, right? But the way that we've historically done that over time is that we've looked at it as like just an engineering problem, right? Not also a social problem, or a health or a community health problem. And what I mean by that is this. So the way air pollution control law works is that we look at at each individual facility of a certain size, right? And many of you probably already know this. And we ask ourselves questions about are the processes being run there emitting pollution over a certain level? And if so, that pollution needs to be controlled through the use of certain types of equipment that achieves certain technologically based standards. And if you have the pollution and you have the equipment and the equipment meets a technological standard, you're good to go, right? But what happened? And we look at that think of it as a book of stamps. We look at it based on one stamp at a time, right? Across the state. But what happens when all the stamps are nested together on the same page of that book, but there are less and less stamps on later pages as you go? That is the outcome we find ourselves in based on the system that exists. And so by adding a few questions to our existing process, including, well, how many pollution generating facilities are already in that community, which is not something that has ever been asked before. Because the assumption made is that if you're meeting the goals set through the adoption of technology, you are protecting the public health writ large. However, what we see is in reality is higher degrees of pollution in some places versus others, highly correlated to the multiplicity of those facilities. Because looking at it by one postage stamp at a time and not looking at the conditions of the whole community, it leads to outcomes where that first page of the book of stamp can be real full and the later pages can't. And turns out that those later pages have a lot more political power, have a lot more information, a lot more access to resources, and the ability to say, no, please don't put that postage stamp on this page, put it on the first one with all the other postage stamps. Mm-hmm. And again, an overly simplistic way to put it, but that's an easy way to think about it. So how do we improve upon that? We don't send our pollution somewhere else. We've done that for the last 50 years. We deal with it better. So I know, Candace, you have to go at some point. Any last words before you do? And then I'm happy to take questions and engage with everyone here.
Just to say that I want to make myself available to you all. Sean, if you can put my email address in the chat.
Will do.
Reach out if you have any questions or want to follow up. But it was good to have this time with you, and good rest of your conversation with the commissioner.